Hello everyone, I'm Daz and welcome to American Civil War and UK History. This presentation is available as a video on our YouTube channel or as a podcast from wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you're watching on YouTube, remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a big thumbs up. And to keep up to date with everything American Civil War and UK history, check out our website where you'll find blog posts, podcasts and links to all of our social media pages. The link is available in the podcast description. Now joining me today is Park Ranger at Gettysburg National Military Park, none other than Matt Atkinson. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very kind, very kind.
Thank you. Right, and today's discussion, of course, is about the third day at Gettysburg, but most importantly, Pickett's charge. Okay, but before we get into that, Matt, I always ask this question when it's the first time on my podcast. How did you become interested in history?
How did I become interested? Well, it actually has to do with your people. Back when, and I don't know if it ever happened in Britain, but in America in the 1970s, if you wanted anything, you got it from Sears and Roebuck, and you ordered it from a catalog. And I ordered a Fort Ticonderoga, little plastic fort, which was, part of the American Revolution. And it came with a little booklet on the American Revolution. And, being from Mississippi, if you know United States geography, Mississippi was not a state or a colony at the time of the Revolution, as we call it. And so what was around me in Mississippi? It was in Civil War. So my parents started taking me to various places. Shiloh, Vicksburg will be the closest. And, it kind of morphed into that, the Civil War always being present in the southern United States.
Excellent. Thank you, mate. Okay, let's get into it. So we're going to talk about Pickett's charge. Now, obviously, there's 2 days before Pickett's charge. Just give us a summary. And I know it's difficult because you could do podcast after podcast after podcast about the first 2 days at Gettysburg. But just give us a summary of what happened on the first 2 days and how we're going to end up at the point.
When you look at military history, or you look at history in general, the hardest thing to do is to judge them by how they thought. Let's start on that level right there. What was their mindset? I mean, how did they view things in the world? And the second thing, as far as military history, is to put the fog of war in there. What I mean by the fog of war is kind of like a murder mystery. What did they know and when did they know it? It's easy on Monday morning to come back. They say in America, it's easy to do Monday morning quarterbacking. That means second guessing what you would have done if you were the coach or the player or something. And in this case, the general. So the Battle of Gettysburg occurs from July 1st through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1863. In the American Civil War, it's midway. So the Civil War goes from 1861 to 1865. The significance of Gettysburg is the southern states invade the northern states. And this is the furthest penetration by the Confederates, as the Southerners were called, by a Confederate force during the Civil War. And what they're playing for are high stakes. They are in the American Revolution, to go back to the 1700s versus, when we broke away from Great Britain. We got the colonists, the future United States, got very lucky when France intervened. I don't think we could have beaten the mother country without the French. I mean, that goes without saying. Some Americans might not like that. So if you go 77 years later, what is Robert E. Lee, the Confederate commander, trying to do? He is trying to get Great Britain, France, Spain, anybody who wants to come in and recognize the Confederacy. In other words, help us out, being from the South, us. So that's why he's invading the North. That sends a clear signal to the British government that the Confederate States of America are a viable nation and they are worth helping out. So that culminates, that invasion of the southern states culminates in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, when both armies stumble into each other. Neither one knew where the other one was, and that we could do a whole hour on why that happened. But they stumble into each other basically because of lack of cavalry. And once they set it off, once they collide with each other, it's like they call all their friends. And so Gettysburg is the focal point of the battle because the town itself is the junction of 10 roads. All right. So when you got roads leading in that many directions, like spokes on the wagon wheel, you can funnel in a lot of men in a short period of time if you have multiple roads running into the location. So the South starts the battle with around 70,000 men. The United States starts with around 95,000 men, depending on who you read. And on the first day of the battle, the South, in the words of Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was not here, but in his country jargon, he said, he would say, you always get there firstest with the mostest, in his country jargon, which I'll leave for your fellow countrymen to decipher what I just said there. But in other words, the South may be outnumbered, but on the first day of the battle, the South had more men at Gettysburg. And so as a result, after an all-day struggle, big battle, 15,000 casualties, including prisoners, Robert E. Lee and the Confederates, who never expected to have this fight, have been victorious. Now, you go back to Wellington, you go back to Napoleon. These are the big dogs that these United States military officers, or in this case, former United States military officers, that's who they emulate. And that's who they want to, that's who they study. And so to understand why Pickett's charge is going to happen, you have to go back to the first day and realize, what did Robert E. Lee know and when did he know it? He knows on the first day that he has defeated a portion of the Union Army. There are 7 Union Corps, and Robert E. Lee on July 1st destroys 2 of them. So in the vein of Wellington and Napoleon, if you are outnumbered, how do you defeat a superior force? Well, you defeat it by destroying it piecemeal or in detail. And so that is, if you get that in your mind, you can understand why the next 2 days, the second day and the third day being Pickett's charge, Robert E. Lee is trying to destroy the Union Army before it can concentrate together. And so on the second day, he tries to follow up his victory on the first day with a heavy assault. He gets probably, ballpark estimate, he probably gets in 30,000 men into the assault on the second day easily. And he comes this close, but he doesn't win it. And so he's sitting here. So to leading into Pickett's charge, let me back up and roll everything I said into one. They fought wars different back then. I'm not telling your viewers anything that they don't know, but it needs to be restated. They fought to win back then, and casualties were just part of it. That's just something that came with warfare. Today, we try to minimize casualties, especially civilian casualties, but we're not, it's been a long time since the world saw a knockdown, drag out, battle, maybe in Ukraine. But it's been a while. And so Robert E. Lee, and I hope this makes sense. He is willing to spill blood here in the North in order to save blood, if that makes sense. In other words, you get it over with. Veteran troops, you don't let a war go on and on and on. You either win or you lose, but either way it ends. And that's what Robert E. Lee is trying to do. So here he is after the first 2 days of battle. He wins the first day. He destroys a portion of the Union Army. I said 7 corps. He destroys 2 of them. On the second day, he destroys another corps. entirely. That's Dan Sickles for the Gettysburg fans out there. And he beats up on portions of basically 3 other corps. So if you put yourself in the mindset of Robert E. Lee, when dawn comes up on the 3rd day of the battle, I'm asking your viewers, could you walk away from it? You spilled all this blood in Virginia and won all these battles so you could get into the North and get to what Americans call in our football, our version of football, the Super Bowl. All right. You get to the Super Bowl. Are you going to play 3 quarters or are you going to play 4 quarters? And Robert E. Lee is not going to leave this field without having attempted everything he could, because he feels long term that the South is declining as far as numbers and resources, and the North is on the rise. And so in boxing terms, he doesn't want this fight to go 15 rounds. He's looking for a knockout. And that sets up Pickett's charge. He's just not going to leave the field without a fight.
That is an excellent.
Does that make sense?
Explanation. Yeah, fantastic explanation. And again, as we look at it from our aspect of 21st century, 20th century, we know what's going to happen, and they don't, do they? And also, so there's always been sometimes a little bit of criticism. Oh, he shouldn't have done this, he shouldn't have done that. But again, how, like you just said, he's knocked out 3 corps. So he believes this, doesn't he, that the centre is the weakest, and that's where they're going to win this victory. Is that right? Would I be right in saying that?
Yes. Robert E. Lee said privately after the war that the reason that looking at your map that your viewers can pull up, that if you look at roughly the fishhook line, that blue line which you have right there, Robert E. Lee said after the war that he had 3 corps. The Union had 7. The corps for the Confederates were about 20,000 men apiece. They were much larger, same military organization, but they were much larger than the United States. He said after the war that he tried to get his 3 corps commanders to attack simultaneously over the course of the battle, and he failed. In other words, he felt that the big part of the defeat was because the way his army attacked piecemeal. Robert E. Lee, in poker terms, wants to push all of his chips in to the center because he thinks he's got a good hand, and he wants to get it over with. And he said privately he failed to do that.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said there he had a good hand, and let's be honest, he had a good hand, because up the road, unused, is George Pickett, Pettigrew, and Trimble. Yeah, so Longstreet's first corps. There's some guys there that have only just got there. Did they get there on the 2nd? Is that correct? And so he's going to use these guys, isn't he? So tell us about these guys.
Okay, so the Robert E. Lee lines up. If you look at the figures from left to right, you have the corps commander, and then you have the division commanders. So let's have, before we get into the characters for your viewers, let's set up the pyramid here. All right, Army organization. I don't know if Britain has the same organization, but you have an Army commander at the top of the pyramid. And then underneath that, you have corps. And underneath corps would be divisions. So let's take the Confederate Army since they're up here. Each Confederate corps, I said there were 3 corps, has 3 divisions apiece. So that's 3 times 3 is 9 infantry divisions for the Confederate Army are here. They're numbering about, a division is about 6, 7, 8,000 men apiece, depending on which division you're looking at. So within those divisions, going down the pyramid, are brigades. As you go further down the pyramid, the more units you get. And underneath the brigades are regiments. So when you come to Gettysburg, most of the monuments are to that bottom tier. They're to regiments. All right, down at the bottom. So to rehash, the people that you have in front of you, the gentleman on the left is James Longstreet. He is Lee's senior corps commander. The gentleman to his right is George Pickett. That is the last out of 9 infantry divisions. Only Pickett's division has not fired a shot. So it's Robert E. Lee and James Longstreet's freshest division. Now, the two gentlemen to the right, in the black background, that would be James J. Pettigrew, a former mathematics professor from UNC. And the one on the far right would be Isaac Trimble, who entered for Pennsylvania without a command, but expected a vacancy. And sure enough, one appeared when the predecessor got wounded the prior day. So these three men, Pickett, Pettigrew, and Trimble, otherwise known, Trimble was called Aunt Nancy by his soldiers. I think he was kind of a picky guy.
Yeah.
These three are going to be the division commanders for Robert E. Lee and Pickett's charge. And between the three of them, with the losses that they have, and of course, some of them are not putting in their entire division, Trimble specifically, they come up with what we think is around 12,000 men between, 2.5 divisions fronting that assault. Robert E. Lee thinks he has 15,000 men in the assault. You see that number thrown around. But remember, they don't have, it's not a video game, folks. They don't have a real-time tally of, losses. That takes time. Everything has to be done tabulated by hand. And so if you're talking about 70,000 minus casualties, I mean, it's going to, yeah. So for the assault on July 3rd, he chooses Pickett's division, which is around 5,000 infantry, Pettigrew and Trimble, which are around 6,500 men collectively together, and they get this assault. The big thing that I hope your viewers are picking up on, though, is I said that there was only one fresh division left in the Confederate Army. That's Pickett. The Pettigrew and Trimble have already seen combat over the previous 2 days. And, getting into Monday morning quarterback, and it's easy for me to say this, those troops, some of those troops should not have been in the assault. They were badly cut up from the previous 2 days. I mean, if you lose key leadership, you lose your sergeants, captains, you have a command vacuum going on. It's hard for a unit to be efficient. But, hindsight being 2020. They were at the wrong place at the wrong time for them, because they were in the right place to jump off for the assault. And so Robert E. Lee chose them basically because they were there.
Now, when he's talking over this plan with Longstreet himself, obviously because of the movie Gettysburg and the book Killer Angels, we're always led to believe that Longstreet was against this attack. Is there any truth in that?
Yes. But, and I'm sure I've noticed with people, I meet a cross section of this world here at Gettysburg. And I've noticed that, pretty much beside the accents, people are the same a lot of times. So for your viewers that happen to be married, I always use this analogy. When it comes to the truth, they say in America, there's always 3 sides to the truth. There's his, hers, and the truth, right? There's that version, this version, and then down the middle, which is the truth. James Longstreet, getting to the subject, does not want to do the assault. The problem with the Killer Angels and James Longstreet, as far as his account, is going back to the truth. I don't have Robert E. Lee's side of the truth because he didn't write it. All I have is James Longstreet's version of the truth. So what is the truth? His, hers, and ours here. So Longstreet definitely does not want to do it. He didn't want to attack on the second day. Let's start there. And if you think he didn't want to do it on the second day, you wait till he gets to the third day. And he is really not wanting to execute the orders to push the assault across the field.
Mm-hmm. What a great. So I didn't realize. So Robert Lee never wrote anything about Gettysburg at all, or not, or just about this?
Well, I'll give you an example. Robert E. Lee, people kind of like the Bible, these Gettysburg buffs, they'll sit down and go word for word with Robert E. Lee in every sentence. And Robert E. Lee didn't write those reports. He edited the reports. His staff officers would compile it, write basically what had happened. What Lee would do, going to your question though, when Lee would edit it, he would remove all recriminations that were in there, or most recriminations. So he's not going to put in his report, his official report. I argue with James Longstreet, General Longstreet, all day, all morning about making this assault right here. He removes all of that. So because that's, he's trying to get the Army to pull as a team, and he doesn't have time. It's very unusual for a leader. If your people are wondering why some Americans admire Robert E. Lee, I mean, that's one of the traits. I mean, he puts others before self. And so that wouldn't ever come out in public, whatever was said between the two men.
Mm-hmm.
And he dies fairly quickly, after
he
the
does,
war.
1870s, he dies in 1870. So, yeah, it's not far after. So, okay, so it also brings a different light on it, doesn't it? Because if you've got someone that doesn't actually want to do something, they're going to do a bad job, aren't they? So
well, it's like when my mom. It's like when my mom. I just put human nature to it. That's all I can do. And your viewers, put yourself in the shoes. Does your attitude not reflect your work, or does your work not reflect your attitude? I mean, when my mom would make me go out and mow those 3 acres, I really didn't want to do that. And so if she had planted any flowers, I'd just mow over. Just ride right over them right there, because I was surly about the whole thing, Longstreet. Now keep in mind, when you get into Gettysburg, you get a lot of different opinions. And just because I'm wearing this uniform doesn't make my opinion the God's truth. It is opinion. What your viewers need to know is I'm a Lee fan. If we were to bring in my coworker over here, Carlton Smith, he is a Longstreet fan. And so he would have completely opposite opinions of that than I am having. But to me, in my opinion, Longstreet does not want to do it. And in my opinion, he drags his feet as long as he can, trying not to do this. As a retired United States military officer told me, I won't curse on your thing, but I'll water it down for you. But he said, talking about Lee and Longstreet on July 3rd, he said, Matt, I learned in the military, if you're gonna goof off, screw off, I don't know how you say it in Britain, do it in front of the boss. So what he means by that is Robert E. Lee wants an assault. James Longstreet doesn't want to do it, but Robert E. Lee is there. So, going back to my pyramid about the truth, this is where I have a hard time, deciphering what actually happened here. I feel beyond a doubt, I feel tension between the two men. There's a lot of tension between the two. Are they like going head to head with the hats turned backwards? No. But Lee is not open to changing the plan. And Longstreet, as a professional military officer, is caught in a conundrum between an assault he doesn't think is going to work. It's going to be a complete failure, which you could argue he was right. And you got Robert E. Lee, who is insisting that this assault is going to take place. So, and 2/3 of the, I should say 60% of the assault force is not even from James Longstreet's command. Only George Pickett is from Longstreet's corps. So you have to wonder, how much did it impact Longstreet? Mm-hmm. Because for better or worse, this is a key point for your visitors or your viewers. Lee is not a micromanager. Everybody's got a different boss. I don't care what country you're in. Everybody's got a boss, and bosses are different. There are macro managers. There are micromanagers. Lee is a macro manager. In other words, he says, do the assault. I want the assault. And he leaves it up to Longstreet to do the details. And, 150 years later, I can see a lot of things that Longstreet overlooked. But in Longstreet's defense, I would challenge your viewers, sit down and try to plan a frontal assault with at least 9, some people say 11 brigades of Confederate infantry. And I'll give you 4 hours to do it, to plan it. I mean, there's going to be, some things that get overlooked, and they were crucial. But going back to it, I mean, Longstreet, he don't want to do it. He says that much. I mean, that's not going that far out on a limb. He says, quote unquote, never was I so depressed as I was this day. And Robert E. Lee, I'll call him the old man. The old man wants it. So what do? It's an order. So, it's a classic military conundrum.
Yeah, really good point. So, okay, we're going to change tact a little bit, and we're going to go across Cemetery Ridge, and we're going to talk about the Commander George Gordon Meade. So what's he's thinking when he wakes up on the 3rd? He's been pummeled on all sides at this point, hasn't he? Culp's Hill was nearly a disaster, wasn't it? I mean, they were very close to breaking through there. They've managed to secure, obviously, I know they've lost Sickles, his corps, but they've managed to secure that part of the battlefield. So what is he thinking when he wakes up on the 3rd of July?
Well, the previous night, let's start a few days earlier and give your viewers the mindset of George Meade. He's only been in command since June 28th. Now, I love Lincoln's wit. There's a lot that you can love and like and dislike about Abraham Lincoln, but I like his wit. And Lincoln turned to his cabinet, his presidential cabinet, and he said, I don't like to change horses in midstream, but I'm going to. So meaning he doesn't want to put a new commander in charge in the middle of a campaign is what he means in his country jargon. Well, he does it. He changes horses, and that guy turns out to be George Meade, who was not even the next in command. And George Meade was not given a choice. He was told that he was taking command. So George Meade, like Robert E. Lee, stumbles into Gettysburg. Can you imagine being 20 miles, we'll say 20 miles behind Gettysburg, and you're learning that portion of your army is being defeated or is in an engagement up ahead. Meade chooses this battlefield without ever seeing it. It will be in 19th century, 18th century, it'd be very rare that a commander would choose a battlefield without ever seeing it. But because of his subordinates' recommendations, Reynolds, Hancock, Howard, etc., Union Corps commanders, Meade arrives here on about midnight on July 1st. And the first thing he says when he gets off his horseback, and his corps commanders that are there are on the field at midnight to greet the commanding general as he dismounts, the first thing he asks his subordinates, is this good ground for fighting? And Hancock, his corps commander, turns to him and says, yes, General, very good ground for fighting. And Meade turns to him and he says, well, that's good because it's too late to leave now. And he doesn't see the battlefield until the sun comes up on July 2nd. Now, if you've already articulated, he barely hangs on the second day. He makes a lot of tactical mistakes, like stripping the troops from Culp's Hill. We won't have to go into all this. He almost loses Little Round Top. He has Sickles go out to Peach Orchard. I mean, George Meade, if he didn't have gray in his beard by then, he's going to have gray by the end of this battle. So on the night of July 2nd, after all these actions, he convenes a military council, a council of war, some people would call it, in a small house in his headquarters, the Lydia Leicester House, which is still preserved on the battlefield. And about 12 generals are in this room. And he puts it to a vote Whether the first vote, I may get them out of order, but one of the votes is should the Army stay or should they retreat? And they vote to stay. And then the next vote is should the Army resume the offensive or should they remain on the defensive? And the vote is taken, and the vote comes out that to remain on the defense until a certain time to await the attack. And so going into the morning of July 3rd, it's Meade is waiting on Lee to make a move. In other words, that has already been decided. And Meade, of course, is looking for an offensive opportunity. But put yourself in Meade's shoes. If he loses this battle, folks, he loses the United States of America. I mean, I don't know what y'all do for a living, but that's a lot of pressure if you think about it. I mean, so if I was in Meade's shoes, and you know, I'm fighting from the mentality not to win, but I'm not trying to lose. In other words, if Robert E. Lee will just leave Pennsylvania, I'll be happy to let him go. And you know, Lee obliges him by attacking it, you know, in the early afternoon of July 3rd. Mm-hmm. And so Meade is the first Union general to defeat Robert E. Lee.
Mm-hmm. And again, it just baffles me that he's chucked into this role, and like you said, he has to deal with so much stuff. And again,
and Meade is not a very, as far as history, it's fine. You know, it's odd. You know, we remember
he's underappreciated personally, but you know,
he is. But Meade is not a likable person.
Mm-hmm.
He's not gregarious. One staff officer referred to him as a goggle-eyed snapping turtle.
Yeah.
And if you look at him, if you find a picture with his glasses on, I see the resemblance. He was very temperamental, and placed under a lot of stress, he could be snappy with people. The end of and Meade, you know, he doesn't get the credit. He a year later in Virginia, he has some military intelligence that's published by the newspapers that wasn't supposed to be published by the newspaper. It's always has always been a tug of war in America between freedom of the press and, you know, military intelligence. Look up our history. Meade finds the newspaper reporter has a barrel taken and holes cut in the side of it. So you place the barrel over the reporter, stick his arms through the holes in the side of the barrel, and then he proceeded to put the reporter backwards on the back of an ass and parade him around the Union camp while the soldiers heckled him. Well, after that was done, the other newspaper reporters dropped George Meade. He disappears from the newspapers, and it becomes Grant's army, who was actually the overall commander. But the newspaper reporters start putting Grant, and Meade just fades into, you know, relative obscurity, despite having, you know, a solid combat record.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he saves the Army of the Potomac as well later on in 1863 when he saves them at Mine Run. You know, that's my view. They would have been slaughtered that day, you know.
Now, for your viewers, he's pulling out Mine Run now. This guy knows Civil War if he's pulling out Mine Run.
Oh, I certainly do. I hang around with Chris Mikowski, so you got to know Mine Run.
Well, he could take you there.
Oh yeah, and also I'd like to go back to your point about him being not universally liked by other people, because of course the rift between him and Sickles happens when you've got the Hooker, Sickles, and of course is it Butterfield gang, and of course they're all doing all sorts of things in the camp, aren't they? And George Meade is outside of that group, isn't he? So and there's always that sort of thing going on in the Army of the Potomac as well, because you've got it with Burnside, you've got it with others, you know. But this is what I love about the Civil War. There's some great stories, great characters.
Yes, there are. I've often wondered from, from somebody outside the United States. I've often wondered, you were telling me about your round table and how many members there are. I've always been very curious about that. Do they not, in the Napoleonic Wars, do they not have the characters?
They
Of
do, they do, but what you've got to remember is, Hollywood in the 1950s and 60s now, and maybe even into the 70s, it's all westerns,
Oh,
and a
yeah.
lot of that is Civil War related somehow or another. And so a lot of these guys grow up with these movies, this Hollywood, and of course, cigarette cards, bubblegum cards, they're all Civil War, and also war gaming and stuff like that. Now, yes, there is that interest in other wars, English Civil Wars, Napoleonic, but again, it's, there's something romantic about the American Civil War.
It is. Going back to when we were talking beforehand, it's for the southern United States, it's a war that's still, present. When you go to an American Civil War battlefield, you will never see you will see an economic lesson frozen in time. When you go to a battlefield, you will see mostly United States monuments or Union monuments and rarely, Confederate. Most of our Confederate monuments were placed during the centennial in the 1960s, 1950s, 1960s. But the point being, at the time that the veterans put these monuments up, the South still didn't have the money economically. They didn't have the money to put these monuments up. So the war, the impact of the war was still being as frozen in time by these monuments you come here today, because 30 years after the battle, the South still haven't fully recovered.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, let's talk about something that's really, really important, and that is the idea of clearing the Federals off of that little bit of ground known as Cemetery Hill. Sorry, sorry, I can't get my words out. You know what I
Yeah.
mean. So we're going to talk
Uh-huh.
about the
Cemetery Hill,
bombardment.
Cemetery Ridge.
Yeah, Cemetery Ridge. Sorry. So we're going to talk about the bombardment now. From what I understand from the research I've done, there was 150 upwards, and I do reenactment, and we only have two or three on the battlefield, and they're loud enough. So I can't even imagine what 150 cannons all going off at the same time sound like. So tell us about this bombardment.
Okay, so let's set up the bombardment. One of my first tours here at Gettysburg that was audited by my supervisor, he will deny this. Scott Hartwig will deny this. But he told me on that first tour that he had hand counted those cannons. And according to Scott Hartwig, which is the gospel truth according to me, there were 147 cannon. For your viewers, cannon is both plural and singular. So, at least in America. So, 147 cannons are lined up. So, before we get into the assault, let's think about the plan right here. You would think that if you line up 147 cannon on a field and they're all concentrated on one point, which is Cemetery Ridge, copse of trees somewhere around there, the angle, if they're all concentrated on Cemetery Ridge, would you not think, before I tell you the ending of this, would you not think that 150 guns could suppress, if not destroy, the Union artillery, who is about half that in strength, about 70 to 80 pieces along that line? You would think they could destroy the Union artillery and at least at the most drive off the Union infantry. That's the plan. In other words, Robert E. Lee is not sending 12,000 infantry across an open field without any preparation. And the South, this is getting into Monday morning quarterbacking or trying not to. The South has never massed that many guns before. Rarely does the Confederacy have artillery superiority in the Civil War, but they do here. Now, you would think that with a 15 to 20-minute bombardment that this could be accomplished, but it wasn't. Half of the guns are commanded by the gentleman on your screen right now, E.P. Alexander. for you Civil War buffs in Great Britain or wherever you're listening from, I highly recommend his book, Fighting for the Confederacy. It was meant for his family. It was never meant to be published. It's a great book. But he talks about that bombardment and what was supposed to happen. And once they kick it off, there's, it's too late to turn around. They don't have enough ammunition they only have enough ammunition to try it once.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, carry on. Yeah.
The first gun is fired at 1:07 p.m. And that's the signal guns. And it's just like, I always liken the bombardment to, what did we have? Didn't y'all have a Jubilee or something like that a few years ago? I was tuning it in and watching the we call them redcoats march down the line. But the fireworks display was awesome. Yeah. I don't know where it was being shown or blown up, but it was awesome. I could watch that all day. Pickett's charge is a fireworks display opposite. Like, at least in America, when you go to a fireworks display, they shoot a few up, but they slowly build up to a crescendo. Well, Pickett's charge starts with the crescendo and goes backwards as the Confederates run out of artillery ammunition. So it starts with a big bang, and then as they run out of ammunition, the rate of fire slows. And the men are getting tired. I mean, it's July. I mean, they're wearing wool uniforms. All that goes into it. And the Union artillery is not suppressed. So what do you do if you're Robert E. Lee? I mean, the artillery doesn't accomplish its objective. Do you still send the infantry across the field? That is what Alexander is trying to get his boss. So it will be Lee, Longstreet, Alexander, the gentleman on your screen right now. And Alexander is trying to get an answer from his boss, Longstreet. Shall I advise the infantry to go forward? And Longstreet he says he's so depressed that he doesn't even want to look at it. But he's faced with a decision. The bombardment has failed and Longstreet is out of time. And as I said earlier, the boss is present. The old man is present. Robert E. Lee is on the field. You're not getting out of this. And so, that sets up the ultimate decision to go forward, which, yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to take it back a little bit. So
yeah, go ahead.
Like the Union artillery, from what I understand, are told to silence their guns at one point to make the Confederates think that they've silenced the Union guns. And from what I understand, is there some kind of disagreement between Hancock and somebody else along the line there?
Okay, so this goes, we could go into World War II, so where we have a common war here together. When they invaded, when the Normandy invasion happened, or when the U.S. was taking those islands in the Pacific, they would always pull up the battleships and bombard the landing zone, and it didn't do a bit of good most of the time. But for the soldiers, it sure felt like it, if that makes any sense to you. So going to your question about the use of artillery on the Union side, there was two different trains of thought. There was the artilleryman, Henry Hunt, who was in charge of the artillery reserve, a little bit of a different setup from the Confederates, but basically both sides had cannons in reserve. Hunt wants to do exactly what you said. He wants to curtail the fire and draw the Confederate infantry out into the open and then use the ammunition. Hancock, who is the corps commander, the infantry commander, and artillery underneath his corps, yeah, that's him, comes from the mentality that I just described. He thinks Union artillery firing is good for the morale of the Union infantry. And so that's where the disagreement is. Some of the guns cease firing. The guns under the reserve cease firing. And the guns under Hancock keep firing. And so, because the Confederates can't get the Union artillery to quit firing, they keep shooting. And so it kind of builds on itself, one side trying to up the other.
Hmm. And I heard somewhere else, and there's a saying in Gettysburg, isn't there? Oh, you're going to move to the centre now. It's going to be a nice, quiet day, and then you've got the scene of the bombardment starting. Now, I don't know whether I read it or saw it somewhere. It might have been on one of the tour videos. I can't remember. But am I right in saying that Hancock was just about to sit down and have lunch when the bombardment started?
They actually thought, some Union soldiers thought that when the bombardment started, that that it was actually a cover for Lee's withdrawal. They weren't convinced that it was actually an assault until the infantry came out of the Confederate infantry came out of the wood line. So Hancock goes to Gibbon's headquarters, which is basically a bunch of cracker boxes in the middle of a field on the backside of Cemetery Ridge. And they found, I don't know where they found this, but they found the forget how they described this, but it was a skinny chicken.
Hmm.
And it was, I don't know how it survived that long, but somebody, their servant or part of their headquarters had cooked this chicken. And so they're eating chicken soup or chicken stew, and the shots start going off, and Hancock rides to the front.
That's fantastic. I love that. That's great. Okay, so at this point, is Meade thinking to himself, they're cut, like you said, you just said to me, they think it's a tactical withdrawal type thing. But what is Meade thinking? Is he thinking they're going to come? They're going to come across. So what is he going to do? And again, they're already fairly fortified there, and you've got those interior lines, haven't you? That's what's good about the fish hook, is you can chop and change people where you need them. It
Yeah.
worked on the second day for the Union. So what is Meade going to do just in case they do come across that field?
Well, this is just an opinion once again, or just my opinion. My favorite Union Corps commander is Hancock, the gentleman on the right of your screen. A solid combat commander. I mean, if Hancock can't take care of it, I don't know who else I would pick over Hancock. So he's got the person he wants in the position that he wants. Meade, on the other hand, as far as his movements on July 3rd, you have to remember, to go back to the Confederate side, that the bombardment is ineffective for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is the fuses are defective. And if your fuses are defective, I don't know how you ever get anything accomplished. So in other words, the cannonballs, if they're explosive cannonballs, case shot, spherical case, if they're supposed to explode over the Union line, well, if they don't, if it's a solid shot or if it's an explosive shell, it just keeps going, and it never explodes. So it's got to go somewhere. So inertia. So it just keeps going over the Cemetery Ridge. Well, guess who's behind there? George Meade. Physically, that's where his headquarters is, behind Cemetery Ridge. So Meade is in his headquarters writing on the paper in Lydia Leicester's bedroom, and all hell breaks loose outside. All these cannonballs start bouncing through the yard and exploding and everything, and horses are going down. And it's probably, oh my gosh, it's probably 300-400 yards behind the front lines of the Union right there. So Meade, during Pickett's charge, moves his headquarters away to Powers Hill, which viewers don't need to know, but another location at Powers Hill. And so he's not even here physically for the assault. It'll be Hancock that handles the impending assault.
And again, he's got the right person there. I mean, the Second Corps, they they do take a kicking through the whole Civil War, don't they? I mean, they're involved in everything.
Well, you go to your friend, our friend Chris Mikowski, who lives around Fredericksburg and stuff. It's a shame, but not to get too ahead of the story. But Hancock, if you give him an order, he'll attack. Now, if for some reason Union Corps commanders could not get it untracked or uncorked on time, but Hancock could. So going to your statement, it's unfortunate, but the Second Corps, Hancock's Corps, is going to be used up from Gettysburg here on out to the
Mm.
next year.
Yeah.
By the time they reach Petersburg, they're a shell of themselves.
Yeah, they
And
get.
basically because they had an aggressive combat commander.
Yeah. And yeah, it's amazing guy. Okay, let's talk about the Confederates. Obviously, as you said, those divisions are going to step out of the tree line, and they're going to embark on this Pickett's charge. Now, it's about a mile of open ground. Is that right, Matt?
Yes, depending on where you start, it's not everything's not parallel to each other. As you can see from your map, your bottom of the map where you see the red lines, those are where they start. They're closer to the Union line than the ones in the center or the left flank if you're doing from the Confederates. So it is roughly 800 yards from Pickett's division, which is bottom of your screen, and about 1,400, 1,200, 1,400 yards from Trimble and Pettigrew's divisions.
Yeah.
So, the problem with the attack, though, when it goes forward is, and I don't think your viewers will have a hard time understanding, if you're trying to present a solid wall of men and you're not starting at the same place, if one group is starting ahead of the other, it behooves you to start the line that has to go the furthest. It needs to go first. But that's not what happens in Pickett's charge. Pickett's division, who has only 800 yards to go, or at least Garnett has only 800 yards to go, marches first, and Trimble and Pettigrew are trying to catch up with him throughout the assault. So in other words, it started off the wrong way. They needed a universal signal to get this assault underway, and that's one of those things they overlooked.
Mm-hmm. So there's a communication breakdown along the way there somewhere, which again, this is the 1860s. So they haven't got walkie talkies or mobile phones, have they? Can't send each other a message, say, right, we're going to go first, But there was a way of communicating, though, wouldn't there have been? I mean, they could have communicated that, surely.
Well, you could have had in those times, instead of instant communication, you would have something like you would have a predetermined signal. Either, for example, you step off at 2 o'clock, for example, that's one way to do it, or you launch an echelon attack, which means like a falling row of dominoes, and they trip off each other as they go forward, So neither of those were present. So what I'm saying is Pickett's division, that fresh division, which I mentioned earlier, is going to reach the Union lines before the majority of the rest of the Confederates get up. They'll have Archer's, Fry's brigade with them, a little bit from Pettigrew, but the majority of Pettigrew's division's lagging.
So you're not going to get that punch, are you? That initial punch. If they was all concentrated together, could have been a bit more of a punch when they got there.
It is. Yeah. It is, and it's already being thrown off. And the commanders, let's go down to the field commanders, the brigade commanders, corps, division, brigade. The brigade commanders are having to make adjustments on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's from the minute they step off, the whole plan is shot. Pickett doesn't have any support on the Confederate left coming forward until Pettigrew is supposed to come up, take them off. So Pickett, from his standpoint, he has no choice but to go forward and with the assault, and hopefully his friends, his comrades, will be up soon enough, as soon as they can get there.
Mm-hmm. And again, as I pointed out, it's over in some spots, it's over a mile, but also they've got a fence to connect them with out there, haven't they? And then they've got to get across the road as well. But not only that, the Union artillery are going to open up hell on them, aren't they? So what would that have been like for these guys out in the open?
Okay, so the artillery for both sides in the Civil War have 4 different types of rounds. They have a solid shot, they have two different types of explosive shells. One is called shell. It's a hollow cannonball filled with black powder. The other one is spherical case, which is a hollow cannonball filled with lead pellets and gunpowder. It's meant for anti-personnel. And then the fourth round is called canister, which is a tin can filled full of lead balls. And it basically turns the cannon into a giant shotgun or less, a giant shotgun at 400 yards or less. So you have those different types of rounds. Let's go back to your earlier question about the artillery. Some of the Union artillery, especially Hancock's guns, have shot up all their long-range ammunition during the bombardment because they kept firing. And so they have a finite amount of ammunition too. The guns further to the south on your map, that would roughly be, where you see the word Birney and Caldwell right there. Those guns were under the artillery reserve. They had enough ammunition, long range ammunition. So what happens when the Confederate infantry steps off is I don't want to give you the wrong picture. I'm not saying it goes dead silent, but going to what you said earlier, how loud that bombardment was, it was quiet. Because the Confederate cannoneers cease firing. They're out of ammunition. The infantry's got to pass to the front, etc. And the Union, when they slacken off, the Union artillery does also. And so for a moment in time, for a couple of minutes, as the Confederates form on the field and they start across, the Union soldiers can sit there and they can witness this without much shells going around them or anything like that. And it was a sight that was magnificent. Union soldiers would, to put it into context for you, I don't know the terrain in Great Britain, but in America, especially at that time, it was wooded. And most of the battles were fought in Virginia. Well, up here in Pennsylvania, it's open. They tell me it's like the mainland of Europe. It has wide open plains, where you can bring
it's like
those
farmland, isn't it, in a way, I suppose?
Yeah, it's like farmland. And so this is one of the few times in the American Civil War where the Union soldiers can see the whole thing.
Whoa.
They can see all 12,000 Confederates coming across, and they would have had their arms at right shoulder shift, and the battle flags up and bayonets on the top. I mean, it was a beautiful, beautiful sight.
And again, if I go back to the movie, that was one of the things that always gives me goosebumps when they first step out of the woods and you hear the clinking of the cups and you hear the command to march, and then the music playing. That gets me every time. And so to be there in person, to actually witness this, like you just said, oh my God, it must have been amazing. Even though it's so horrible,
Oh yes, it was amazing. And Union veterans would spill gallons of ink trying to capture that moment. Some did a better job than others. But, with hindsight as our benefactor, and purely I want to reiterate that hindsight is the benefactor. This is the South's greatest attempt to achieve independence. So not only do you have this assault coming across it, you have the consequences of the assault. If these Southerners can break through the Union line, the war, and drive the Union Army off, there's a good chance that the Lincoln administration might sue for peace. They can go home. So you're going into the mentality of those soldiers crossing the field. One thing, they got their comrades beside them. I don't care what country you come from. You're going to fight for your comrades. If you're a military unit worth any sand, you're there for your comrades. I doubt the mission in Afghanistan is a top priority when the bullets are whistling around you, but you'll do it for your comrades, and they'll step across there. The other thing is that the pressure of it all. If they run away, you have to remember these men were raised and they're still with their hometown people. They're not with, people from across the state. I mean, these are their neighbors. And so, you got that pressure weighing in on them. And then, like one Confederate soldier said, Alexander to be exact, who you showed earlier, he said, we knew it was a desperate thing to attempt, but General Lee had ordered it. So it must be okay. You know, it's like I don't know how many viewers watch American football, but it's like you know, you got your quarterback in there. Your quarterback, who you believe will take you to victory, says you're going across this field, and that quarterback's Robert E. Lee. As Shelby Foote said in Ken Burns' series, it's a whole lot easier to go across that field than it is to tell Robert E. Lee, I ain't going.
Mm-hmm. Great points, great analogies as well. Yeah, I do actually like American football, by the way, as I call it. But I quite like the Bills, so I won't say anymore. But
Okay,
anyway,
that's fine.
I'll get
I'm with the
criticised.
Saints. I'm harmless.
Oh, okay. Right, let's talk about one of the most famous things of the climax. And of course, that is encapsulated in the movie as well. And Armistead is going to get his hat and he's going to stick his sword through his hat and go, "Who will come with me?" And he'll jump on the wall. Does that actually happen?
It does actually happen. The map which you have out here, and I would say this about any map, when your viewers look at a map, remember the map is trying to show a moment in time. And in this case is trying to show all the moments in time at the same
Mm-hmm.
on the same map. So the bottom two red arrows that you see on the map are going to reach the Union line first. That is Pickett's division. You see the two red lines on the bottom. That'd be Garnett, Kemper, and then Armistead, who you just mentioned, is crossing that road along the Emmitsburg Road. If your viewers look at where Armistead is and what's in front of him, the two brigades in front of Armistead are going to take the majority of the casualties. Was that designed that way? No, but they're trying to pull this assault off on the fly. So, in other words, 2,200, 2,400 Virginians under Armistead are coming up behind these Confederates, and they're just melting into the earth as the bullets are coming. It just looks like they drop into the earth. Meanwhile, to their left, the Confederate left up along the highway, Pettigrew's command is just melting away from that highway. If I could teach your viewers anything, your Gettysburg buffs, about Pickett's charge, notice how the road, which you see through the middle of your map right there, it's not parallel with the Union line. The Confederate left flank is a lot closer. The road is a lot closer to the Union position than it is on the right flank. In other words, the road tapers away as you go toward the bottom of the map. And so Pickett's division, I'm not saying it was easy, but it was easier to cross the road around the Cadore farm than it was further to the north up around where you see Bryan, the word Bryan, Black Dot and so forth. So they're just getting cut to shreds. So here comes Armistead, back to your point. He's got a brigade. It's the best brigade left on the field. It has suffered relatively light casualties. But in front of him, the two brigades in front have already hit the Union line and they've come to a stop. Now, some of your people may play, military games, board games, video games. This is reality right here. It is so loud on that field with everybody shooting out there and the guns, artillery going off and everything. It is so loud that you and I could not have a normal conversation. So when Armistead crosses the field, he has 5 regiments in that brigade. He needs to change directions because there's a roadblock in front of him. He can't get through these Confederates. He needs to change directions to the left or the right or the Confederates in front of him. How does he do that as he crosses that highway right there, the Emmitsburg Road? If he wanted to change directions, Armistead would have to go find, and you can imagine how many hundreds of yards his front is. He would have to find 5 colonels, if they're still alive. And 5 colonels, each colonel would have to find 10 captains if they're still alive. And 10 captains would have to find 10 sergeants. And the sergeants would get the men moved. This is happening too fast. Everything's moving too fast. They're going to hit the line within 15 minutes, and no commands can be given. So going to Armistead, what does he do? What can he do once he crosses the road? So what he did in order to inspire his men is he took his hat out and he stuck it on the tip of his sword. When you're in a line of 2,200 men and they're going across the field, you can't, if you're shoulder to shoulder, you can't see the ends of the line. But you know Armistead's hat. And if this guy can stand in front of you and just nonchalantly walk across the field waving his hat around, well, it's done throughout the centuries. I mean, he's leading from example, and the men will follow him in there.
Yeah.
When they cross the road, though, and they get to your point, they just run into like a traffic jam. And that beautiful line which Armistead had, which was still intact, runs into the back of the two front Confederate brigades, and it just all blends in together. And so unit cohesion is gone now. It's just gone. And what do you do at this point? If you look at your map, you see the blue at the center of the map, and you'll notice that it's at right angles to the red. Well, the Union is just wheeling, out in the field and crossing the T on Pickett's right flank, and they're shooting into them. So Armistead can see this, and he can look to his left. Look at the top of the map. Look at those blue marks shooting into the flank of the Confederate left over there. Armistead can look at that. He can look behind him, and he can see that there's no reinforcements coming. There's no succor coming. All right, literally and figuratively. And so he decides, well, you can't go backwards. You have to go forward. And so in a hail of gunfire, and I have no explanation for your audience. I don't know. Everybody thinks they could do this, but I don't know if I could do it until I had to do it. Armistead stands up on that wall and holds his hat aloft and waves it around, and he says to his men, "Give them the cold steel, boys, who will follow me." And over the wall he goes. Now, the Confederate flag bearers have gotten near him because they can't hear, and they know who's supposed to direct them. Well, what are the soldiers doing? They're watching the flags. And so when Armistead goes over the wall, those Confederate flag bearers follow him, 2 or 3 of them, and we don't know the exact number, 100, 200, 300 men charge with Armistead over the wall, and it becomes the climax of the Battle of Gettysburg. Longstreet makes it about, he probably makes it about 30 yards, maybe 20, 30 yards inside the Union position before he's failed. But going back to my earlier point, when he stood up on that stone wall, he had to know what was coming. And I will never, I don't care what side you're fighting for. I don't care what war we're talking about. I'll never understand how a human being comes to the point where you just, this isn't going to be good. I don't know. I guess it's always already resolved in your mind before you ever go across.
It was the point of no return, wasn't it? Basically, technically,
it was the point of no return.
Yeah.
And he wasn't wounded that grievously, but he subsequently died.
I want to take you back to your previous point about, obviously, when they step out the woods the other side, you can see it very clearly. Now, how clearly can, and again, there's Robert E. Lee watching this, is Longstreet watching this, how clearly can the Confederate commanders that are back on that line see what is going on up there?
Oh, well, Robert E. Lee, where the Virginia Monument, if your viewers would like to look up, the park map or whatever, and get a better sense, where stop number 5, the Robert E. Lee Memorial is today, Virginia Memorial, that is the site that we think, or at least one Confederate veteran stated that he saw Robert E. Lee watch the attack from. So think about the paradox of that. You erect a monument to a commander whose assault got a lot of people killed and wounded, etc., from the very site which he watched it. The eyewitness said that Lee sat on a stump with a rubber cloth, like a raincoat, draped over the stump, and he had his head in one hand, and he had the reins of his horse in the other. And I cannot imagine what Lee is thinking as he watched this transpire. Yeah. From the very beginning, especially on Pettigrew's end of the line, the whole Confederate, I'm not talking about Pickett, I'm talking about the other end of the line. One Confederate brigade breaks as they come out of the tree line. That's Brockenbrough's brigade. They come out. Then the next brigade in line is under the command of Joe Davis. Well, Jeff Davis is the Confederate president's nephew. Robert E. Lee probably would have canned this guy within 2 weeks of him getting there, but Lee has to play politics too. But this guy's inept. And so his brigade starts falling apart. Davis's brigade starts falling apart. And so they're coming across this field, and I don't think the men on the left flank like their leaders. I don't think they believe in them. So if you look at your map, for example, to try to give your viewers a sense of what it was like, you see that second line of Confederate infantry coming. It says on the left center of the map, it says Trimble, and then in smaller letters, it says Lawrence and Lane. We have accounts from Lane's men that they had to fix bayonets before they even reached the Union position, because there's hundreds of Confederates running back toward the rear. I mean, the assault is already dissolving by the time they hit the road. And they fix bayonets to keep the people fleeing from breaking their ranks apart. If you fix bayonets, you force them to go around, which I thought was a novel idea against your own friends, but it was effective right there. But chaos, confusion is what I'm trying to get to your friends. They hit that highway, once again, bringing it back to how the highway is closer to the Union position. They're entering a crossfire. You see those Union troops up above you, the 8th Ohio, et cetera, that are up here. I mean, that you could see them. I don't know what I would do. It would be hard for me to march into the teeth of the Union defenses when I'm already getting shot at from the side.
Yeah, I think most people would probably share the same sentiment that, I mean, in a word, I would crap myself. Let's put it like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You never know. No. If you talk, our highest award in America, militarily speaking, is the Medal of Honor, or at least in my opinion, it's the Medal of Honor. I think if you talk to an American Medal of Honor winner, who is our top brave soldiers, get that award. If they're being honest, a lot of those soldiers will tell you what they did on that day, they probably couldn't do the next day. It's just all a matter of time. It's in your mindset.
It's you're in a place at a certain time. You just do what you do, I suppose, in a way.
Right. If you're in enough, they had the mentality of this. I don't know how it goes with the modern military, but Civil War soldiers looked at it as long term. So when the Confederate line hits it and they're repulsed, the Union soldiers start chanting Fredericksburg, Fredericksburg. So for your viewers, that was a previous battle about 6 months before, 7 months before. And the Union had been assaulting across a wide plain, and the Confederates had slaughtered them. And now they had their revenge. So to reiterate, if your combat unit is in enough combat, sustained combat, you have the mentality that, okay, well, I didn't get them today, but I'll get them tomorrow. Or they got us today, but we'll pay them back later. So they look at it. So some good units, good combat units have bad days. If you get in enough firefights. I mean, some units, it's like a football team, like a soccer team. Everybody watches some types of sports, or most people do. You can have the best team in the world and still come out and throw a clunker.
Oh, yes.
And yeah.
Oh, yes. And I'd like to just say as well, don't forget, it's the Second Corps up there, and the Second Corps on the plain in Fredericksburg take an absolute hammering. And
the irony of that is the Union soldiers that were hammered at Fredericksburg are the ones hammering the Confederates at Pickett's charge. And Hancock is the commander, is up and down the line. You talk about leadership to go to the Union side. Hancock, in the middle of that bombardment, is riding up and down the stone wall. One Union soldier said if the cannonballs wouldn't have been whistling past their heads, he would have thought he was a farmer checking his fields.
Hmm.
He just
Yeah.
slowly was riding along through there with a cannonball to knock his full head off, you know.
And he
But
he he is actually wounded, isn't he, during the one of the assaults? And
he's
of course,
wounded at
yeah,
the end of the attack.
yeah.
And Americans always get a kick out of my southern accent when I come in here. He's one because I can't pronounce this word with my southern accent. He's ruined in the growing.
Oh, in the
That
groin. Yeah,
growing.
I like that.
Now that's spelled
Oh, so that's a
Groin,
yeah,
but
that's a painful one. Oh,
it's pronounced Growin. So it's growing.
oh, I love you, mate. You're so good. Oh, you're brilliant. And of
But
course,
he catches a ball in the upper thigh. I
oh,
mean, I don't think
that's
it hit
that's
him.
you've got a main artery up there as well.
Well, the first thing they
Lucky.
do to him is they get him down on the ground. Of course, he's a general, and he gets a lot of attention, a private wanting. But the first thing they tell him is he wants to see how bad that wound is, get a tourniquet on it. But I didn't know this. Apparently, the blood leaking from the wound was not arterial blood. They could
Okay.
tell that right away. So
Mhm.
that's immediately they tell him. But if you can imagine, poor Hancock, um, if you're wounded in the inner thigh, the upper inner thigh, if that's the correct place, and the bullet hit his bone and it buried
Oh,
against the bone and it ricocheted all the way into his hip. They went in there and put him down on a table and stuck their finger in there
oh.
and extracted the
Hmm.
piece of pants. People don't think about this. They
Mhm.
extracted the patch from his pants and a tack nail. There was a tack nail in him, and
Oh,
they pulled it out and they sealed the wound up and they went ahead. Well, the wound never healed. Think about where you ride a horse and where that rubs you. That's a bad place to get a
oh
wound.
dear. Yeah.
So they could never. I'll speed it up, but he could never get it to heal. So he finally went home to Philadelphia, Norristown, and he had a doctor come by and said, "I just can't. I'm going to have to retire." And the doctor said, "Let me think about it." So I don't mean to give your viewers a bad visual, but he had Hancock pull his pants off and he put a chair on the dining room table. And while Hancock was seated on the table in that chair, if you can imagine such a scene, he put Hancock back in the same position that he was shot in because he was on horseback. So when he put him in that chair, and I can't imagine how excruciating this was, and he lanced that wound again, he went up in there a few inches and he found the bullet. They had missed the bullet.
Oh,
And so what had happened was the Confederate bullet had gone through the saddle. That's the horn on the front of the saddle, where you hang on or you tie the ropes off. The bullet had gone through the saddle of the horn of the saddle, had picked up a tack nail as it was going through and driven the tack nail, the piece of cloth, and the bullet into his leg. And he's pretty good after that.
yeah.
But,
And again, because he's a general, his clothes are probably a little bit cleaner. So having a bit of
oh,
fabric inside you probably done him a favor too, because
yeah.
obviously, as like the average soldier, they were so dirty. I mean, majority of them die from disease or gangrene or whatever from their clothing that goes inside them after being shot.
People, I'm talking about 1862 when I
Yeah.
say this. I don't mean to give the ladies to offend any of the ladies that might be watching today, but the people of Frederick, Maryland said in 1862 that they could smell the Confederates before they got there.
Yeah.
It's just like if you can imagine filthy, like
Oh my
filth,
God.
just
Yeah. Anyway, Matt. So the battle concludes. It's unsuccessful. I just want just a moment, and I know obviously overall the casualties of Gettysburg is up around the 63,000, I believe, casualties. But what about just Pickett's charge on its own?
So Robert E. Lee loses, we think, about 50% out of 12,000 in about 45 minutes. Now that's not all killed for your viewers. That includes killed, wounded, captured, and wounded captured. I could have to look up the exact figures, but we think he loses about 50%. Out of that 6,000, probably around 2,500 are prisoners. So to give you an idea of the impact of the bullets and so forth, they just get swallowed up. The paradox for Robert E. Lee is, or for any military commander on any level, is in order to be successful, you have to be willing to destroy the very thing that you love. That's always been the paradox of military leadership. Lee sat there and on that stump, which I described earlier, and he watched this debacle happen. At the end of the day, there were 51,000 casualties. We estimate about 7,000 killed outright. We estimate a little over 30,000 wounded. That's hard to get an adjustment on. The South has a lot stricter standard for wounded than the North did. So I don't know if we'll ever have a hard figure for that. You know, the North would count a scratch. The South, you going back in the ranks because they didn't have the manpower. So I would estimate, 10, I may be too low, 10 to 15% of that 30,000 are going to die shortly thereafter. Mortality rate, from attrition, wounds. Some people, human body just, is the finest machine ever built. And some people linger. So we put around 10,000 dead bodies in the immediate aftermath of the battle. We estimate 5,000 to 6,000 horses and mules killed on this battlefield, and around 10,000 prisoners, about 5 on each side.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's what gets forgotten about is the horses and the mules. They always seem to forget about that. They get caught up in this awful meat grinder as well, don't they?
Well, the horses are one thing, but what I've discovered recently, I'm not an equestrian person, but if you think about a team of horses, and especially if you have a large team of 4 to 6 horses pulling these cannons and so forth, if one of those horses are very attuned to each other, so because they spend a lot of time together, and they're intelligent animals. Well, if one of them gets hurt or 2 of them gets hurt, they're going to spook the rest of the team. So even if the animal was salvageable, I think you'd have to put it down fairly quickly, or else you're going to lose the other 5, on the team. Mm-hmm. So the only reason I'm telling you that is I want to put the mental vision into your viewer's mind. I mean, there was a lot of hard decisions. They did not. I'm not saying the generals and so forth didn't have like pet horses. But for the wagon trains, for the artillery, where the horses are primarily used, they have a 19th century mentality, going back to the very beginning of this conversation. In other words, they're machines, kind of like soldiers. You're just cogs in the wheel. And so, just like we would run a steam engine or an electric engine or something like that, they're going to run those horses. The mission is more important than the animal, or the human, for that matter.
Now,
so a lot of them get killed.
Yeah, one of the biggest losses, obviously, is Pickett's division, and there's that famous scene in Gettysburg movie. Again, I'm sorry to keep bringing it back to it. He says, "Form your division," and he goes, "I don't have a division," because so now Pickett never forgives Lee for this, does he?
No, he never forgives him. Pickett, I think Stephen Lang in the movie captured Pickett perfectly. I think Pickett was a jovial person. To push back on my narrative about Lee and Longstreet, since we have all 3 of them, Lee and Longstreet may have been fighting that day, and Longstreet may not have believed in the assault, but before it took place, George Pickett believed it was going to be successful. And he had a young girlfriend back home. He won't get home to her too. And so, when his division is massacred, he comes back. For Robert E. Lee's standpoint, what did he know and when did he know it? Lee is expecting a Union counterattack. So going to the movie when he's saying, well, I don't know what the movie says, but historically says he's trying to brace Pickett. Pickett is crying as he comes off the field. And Lee is mounted by this time, and he rides over to Pickett and he says, General Pickett, reform your division behind the woods and prepare to resist the advance of the enemy. And Pickett looks at him and he says, General, I have no division. And then he ticks off the generals that he's lost, Garnett is down, Armistead is down, etc. And Lee reaches across, I picture the horses at heads at opposite direction. And he reaches across and he pats General Pickett on his hands. And he says to him, come now, General Pickett, you must do the best you can. I need, he basically tells him it has been all my fault. Lee does. And Pickett won't have anything. He rides off. And subsequently behind the lines, they're trying to corral his disheveled division, for lack of a better word. They're trying to reform and reorganize them. And Pickett just tells them to go back to the campsite. He overrules them. He seems to be in shock, in other words.
Yeah.
Now going to your statement, he hated him. They meet after the war. You have to keep in mind, this is not very well known, but the end of George Pickett comes 2 years later in April of 1865, when he's at a place called Five Forks, and he decides to go to a fish fry. In the middle of an impending battle, George Pickett decides to go to Tom Rosser's fish fry. And so, anyway, his command is subsequently routed. This is a week before the end of the Civil War, and Robert E. Lee sees him with the Army. And this is very telling for Lee, because Lee doesn't say negative things often. He turns to his staff and he says to his staff, why is that man still with this army? Mm-hmm. So you talk about two people disliking each other. They meet in a hotel, which was not planned, but they meet in a hotel in Richmond, Virginia after the war. And the interview quickly concludes. I can tell you exactly what Robert E. Lee did. If Lee didn't like you, he would kill you with formality. He would stand as erect as a ramrod, and it would be yes and no, and you would quickly get the point right here. Well, when he exited and came out, Pickett did, he's walking with John Mosby, the gray ghost, and he turns to Mosby and he goes, that old man had my division massacred at Gettysburg. And Mosby looks at him and he says, George, but he made you famous. And pretty much if you don't have Pickett's charge,
Yeah, that's it. It's named after him and everything.
It's named after him,
So. Yeah, whoa. Didn't think about it like that. Wow, that's really interesting. Learn something new every day. Okay, so just quickly, now I understand that Lincoln is down in the White House and he is being told what is happening on that battlefield every minute. Is that correct?
No, he wouldn't have had up-to-date minutes, but he would have had, there would have been a lag time, but Meade would write the authorities in Washington and keep them posted, but it would not be instantaneous. I believe, I'd have to look, but I believe the nearest telegraph station was probably in Westminster, Maryland.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So you're talking about a 20-something mile ride, to get it over there. Lincoln knows that the battle is underway. One of the interesting things about Lincoln is, I'm not saying he gives the Gettysburg Address, but around July 4th or July 5th, I know people are going to think this is crazy, but you could actually walk up to the American White House, the home of the president. There was no fences. There was no guards. You could walk in the front door if you wanted to, even in the middle of a war. And, not that they walked in, but there was a crowd. Once the word was received in Washington that a victory had been won by the Union forces, a crowd gathered at the White House and they started chanting for Lincoln to come out and speak. And he came out on the balcony. Now, I'm not saying, to go back to what I said earlier, I'm not saying this is the Gettysburg Address, but for you Lincoln fans in the crowd today, on the viewing today, a reporter was there taking shorthand of Lincoln's remarks. It's not the Gettysburg Address, but it's kind of like, I'll try to get with your people here. It's kind of like McCartney and Lennon. I think we have a universal thing here, right? You can see the outline of the Gettysburg Address starting to form even in July of 63.
Yeah. And I've always found it strange that it's the 4th of July that, because you have the fall of Vicksburg as well. And you've got this great victory at Gettysburg. And it's
Yeah.
strange.
And it's America's birthday too.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's crazy, it's like it was meant to happen that way, wasn't it? Okay, the other thing I'd like to bring up is Meade gets a lot of criticism, and I stick up for him here of not pursuing Lee. Now, you've just fought a 3-day battle, you're exhausted. Well, I can see why he doesn't. Others argue and say, well, he should have destroyed him, you know. And he had chop opportunity. I mean, what is the ambulance train is what 15 miles long or something like that? As Lee,
When Lee has to, after Pickett's charge, Lee knows he's got to go. I mean, all 9 infantry divisions have been engaged. He's going to hang out for a couple days until July 5th. On July 4th, he hopes Meade will attack him. That's how aggressive Lee is. But nevertheless, on the 5th, he starts pulling out. When Lee gets back, and I'll get to Meade, when Lee gets to the Potomac, the river has risen and the waters have flooded. And he's trapped on the Maryland side of the Potomac River. So George Meade is able, with the Union Army, to catch up to Robert E. Lee while he's still in Maryland, because Lee can't get across the river. So Lincoln, all 3 men together, Lincoln, Meade, and Lee, Lincoln is aware that Meade has an opportunity to attack Lee. Now, a battle doesn't occur, so it's hard to make statements on something that doesn't happen. But apparently the Confederate position, even though they have their back to the river, the Confederate position is very strong. And the Confederates have dug in. So your viewers would just have to make up their own mind. This is where the criticism of Meade comes in. Some people like it, some people don't. Meade calls a council of war, and he takes a vote of his corps commanders, like he did on July 2nd. And his corps commanders recommend against attacking Lee at the Potomac along that position. And when that happens, when Lee gets across the river, Lincoln is furious at George Meade. Now, I would throw this out. I've nicknamed this the Lincoln Rule. When Abraham Lincoln is assassinated a couple of years later, they're going through his desk, and in one of the pigeonholes, they find a letter from Lincoln to George Meade, and it's scathing letter criticizing Meade. But Meade never sent it. Lincoln never sent it to Meade. And relating it to what you can learn from Abraham Lincoln in the present day, I can't tell you, and I would recommend to your viewers, follow the Lincoln Rule. Wait 24 hours before you send that email. Wait till the next day.
How many times have we all been in that position, ladies and gentlemen? Sure. I have. I have. What a great point. Seriously. Now, another thing I'd like to bring up, Matt, just before we finish up here, is there's so when I came over in 06 and 07, I had a great tour with a guide, and he explained that there was still some debate over the high water mark and what Confederate regiment reached the highest part of the over the wall or whatever. So is that still a debate that happens today?
Well, hard to explain, but the stone wall in which the Union position is along is not one wall. If your viewers will get out a map and they'll see the angle and how the Union position juts out in front, etc. So going, who got the furthest is something that's important to the veterans. If you want to get, and it depends on how you slice the pie. I mean, the wall, as you go further north and as the highway gets closer to the Union position, the wall is you get further and further feet wise inside the Union line, but there's no penetration. So I don't know. So what I'm saying is Pettigrew and Trimble could advance further to get to the Union line, the actual Union line, than when Pickett hit it, because the Union line is further out in front where Pickett hits it. So yeah, you could make the argument that North Carolina went further than Virginia, et cetera. But you know, I mean, today, I mean, I don't know how it's really relevant. But yeah, they get into fighting words. Some Union veterans said they never penetrated. So
Yeah.
uh,
I
yeah.
just found that part of it really interesting. I don't know why. It just sort of like stuck with me.
Well, when you come to the
Yeah.
battlefield, there's no
Yeah.
doubt that it influences it, and it
Yeah.
still does today. There are North Carolina units, modern day North Carolina Confederate monuments on the Union side of the wall. I mean, on Cemetery Ridge, and they are further than Armistead's marker to where he's shot down,
Mm.
and that is purely intentional. I'm
Yeah.
sure by North Carolina to make sure that they got further than Virginia, or at least to the modern than the
Yeah.
modern.
Perhaps they're jealous that South Carolina started the war and they thought, well, let's just. And I don't mean
Well,
to be gentlemen, you know.
let me give you an American let me give you an American joke here. How many Virginians does it take to change a light bulb?
I don't know.
That's one to change the light bulb and four to tell you how good the old one was. All right. Okay. Virginia, what I mean by that is Virginia promotes Virginia, and 40% of the assault is Virginians.
Virginian, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And so let's look at it this way, too. I bet your viewers have never thought of it this way. The original 13 colonies that succeeded from Great Britain. I don't know why we don't use that word
Well,
in the
yeah, that's
American
right.
Revolution.
Yeah.
They succeeded. I
I
don't know
like
why you
that.
could do it once and you couldn't do it twice, but I'm waiting
Yeah.
on somebody smarter than me to explain it. Um, Virginia is one of the original 13 colonies. Why is that a big deal? Because the older your state is, the more established your educational system, as compared to my home state of Mississippi, who had only been a state, I think, since 1817 or something like that. It had its educational system was not as grounded or founded, I should say. So, therefore, my point is when it comes to Pickett's charge, you have a lot more literate Virginians. And so your accounts get overwhelmed it gets skewed, I'll use that word, by the number of Virginians that are writing about it.
Yeah. Oh, it's very
So
similar. It's very similar to Joshua Chamberlain's story, really, isn't it? Because
yeah,
he writes, he's a good writer, and he writes himself as the star. And I'm not saying he isn't, but there's more to it, as you know, to the second day and round tops than just Joshua Chamberlain. I'm sorry if that upsets people, but that's the truth.
when the 2001 Space Odyssey starts up, you know who's coming out from behind the curtain. It's
Yeah,
Elvis. Okay.
exactly.
You know,
Yeah,
and when you read Joshua Chamberlain, you just know who's going to be front and center. I mean, it's like putting Mick Jagger out there. I mean,
exactly. Yeah. Great point. Anyway, so just two more little points.
yeah,
Firstly, battlefield preservation. Gettysburg, as I like to call it, is the Disneyland for all of the Civil War buffs. And as you said, the Gettys buffs, as I like to name
yes.
them.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it is. It's so beautiful. There's the the Virginia Monument there. It's just a beautiful battlefield. I mean, I've been there 3 times. I'm going to keep going there and going there again and again at some point. It's just so beautiful, you know. But when did all the preservation of Gettysburg actually start?
Well, the preservation starts immediately after the battle Within the first month, they have bought 17 acres to found the National Cemetery, which is part of the battlefield. Now, they never envisioned 6,000 acres today. But I mean, within the same month, July, August of 63, they're buying land for perpetuity. And the locals, they found the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association. We call that the GBMA around here. And they start buying holdings in here. And then eventually in the 1890s, the United States government gets involved. I think what your viewers would need to know as far as our military parks in America is that Gettysburg is one of the 5 original. It seems like it's 5 this whole program. When I'm just holding up one hand, it's one of the 5 original military parks of the system, and that would be Gettysburg, Antietam, Chickamauga, Chattanooga, Shiloh, and Vicksburg.
Mm-hmm.
And so, why is that important? Because if you're one of the 5, then your park was founded when the veterans were alive. And so, if the veterans were alive, what do veterans do? I'm sure they do the same thing in Great Britain. When you get out of the Army, you run for office. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, the legislatures, as we call them over here, are chock full of veterans. And so they start appropriating money for the erection of these monuments. So my overall point being, if you go to the 5 original parks, you see more cannons, you see more monuments, and you usually see more acreage because we were here first. So, like when you go to pick out a puppy, we get the pick of the litter. When we
what a great point. Yeah. And I think Chickamauga was actually like literally straight after the battle, wasn't it? Because they were having taught. I think that was the oldest, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't get out west yet, unfortunately, but I will do one day. Vicksburg is definitely on my bucket list. But anyway, we're going to talk about this good-looking chappie now, because if it wasn't for this good-looking chap, I'm not sitting here talking to you now, Matt. So there we go. There's Matt doing his thing. Yeah. Look at that good-looking chappie. Hey,
I'm trying to figure out where I am, but it's been some anniversary walk.
Now,
I'm truly blessed. I am. I make a living at a hobby, and the Civil War is my hobby. And I would recommend for anybody, wherever you are and whatever you're into, especially young people, if you can make a living at what you like, go for it. I have had a very, very nice career. I have. I get up every day and I get to come in here and I get to talk about the Civil War.
Yeah. And so there's some fantastic videos of Matt's tours on YouTube. Please go and check them out. That's how I came across Matt. I haven't been lucky enough to have an in-person tour, but maybe one day that'll change. Matt, so obviously when you go out and do your tours as a park ranger, is there like some kind of organisation around that, or how does that happen?
Well, I'm very blessed to have a boss that will give me parameters, but he doesn't tell me what to say. And that's true for everybody, not just me. We have, and I'm proud of this, if I have one thing to say about the interpretation division for our National Park Service, here at Gettysburg, we have a top-notch library that has been put together by hundreds of people donating their families' letters. I'm not saying originals, copies, but they've donated their families' letters. We've built up a library over time. We inherited the War Department's old library as far as the administration of this park. So we have a lot of old Civil War books, regimentals and so forth. In other words, I'm very proud to state that I think you could come here to Gettysburg if you get enough time to research. You could probably write a book without ever leaving our library here. Wow. I mean, there's just that much material. So to your question, when I have to research something, I'll go in that library and besides the books, there are folders. We have a folder for every unit that was on this battlefield, if you can imagine such a thing. And then we have subject folders, like for Joshua Chamberlain will be a subject folder. Sickles would be a subject folder, Robert E. Lee. So we have all this research. And so what I would go in there is cherry pick the sources that I need and start going through it. And like, I don't consider myself, I'll consider myself a historian once I publish a major work. But like a historian, you have to sit down and you have to pick out what do you believe and what do you not believe, because there's always contradictory information, especially when it comes to combat. And old men, people writing their memoirs 30 years later, you can't, I don't put as much value on that as somebody writing July 5th.
No, yeah. And I'm just going to say, obviously, I know you said the Civil War is your hobby and you get into your hobby, but what does Matt Atkinson like to do when he's not doing Civil War? Is there something that you're really into apart from the Civil War?
Well, I have 3 kids,
Wow. Yeah,
which
I have two, so
you have two. I have twin girls, and doesn't God
Oh
have a
well, I've
humor?
got two daughters, so I know what daughters are like. They're not twins, luckily.
Well, I tell you what, man, I didn't have any sisters growing up. My old Matt's on a steep learning curve. What do I do? I go to, yeah, yeah. And they have to get the last word. I don't know how the kids are over
Well, I'll
there.
tell you, I know about that one too. Yeah.
My God, they test anybody around here. Um, so I spend a lot of time with the kids. I have a cabin up around Cashtown, which the Cashtown Inn is featured in the movie. It's very briefly, but that's
Yeah.
the AP Hill scene. And I have 4 cats up on the mountain, 2 of which are mine, and 4 of which I feed. All right. So I guess I have 4 cats now. So what do? I usually just work on that old cabin. That's what I do.
There you go. Thanks, Matt. Well, all that is left to say, my friend, is cheers.
Cheers.